In this Elden Ring Nightreign video, we're going to talk a little bit about party composition and how it can affect your runs out there. I know in Elden Ring Nightreign that you can beat any boss with any party combination. This is absolutely doable. So party composition isn't necessarily something that should make or break your run. But when you're playing in a group with people that you know, party composition becomes a lot less impactful. But when you're playing with randoms, it can absolutely have an impact on how your run is going to go. And that's what I want to look into in this video. We'll be talking about this mostly from the point of view that you are playing with randoms. We'll talk a little bit about parties as well when you're playing with friends and things like that. But most of this is about, when you're playing with people you don't know and can't communicate with. So my inspiration for this video has been kind of something that's been happening to me for a while now. I don't know if it's been happening to you guys out there, but I thought I'd make a video about it. I tend to run into this scenario where I want to play X character and then I get into a game and another person wants to play the same character. And depending on what character that is, sometimes that can be a bad mix. Sometimes it doesn't make any difference. But a lot of times what I find is, okay, I play this character for 3 games in a row, now I'll switch to this character, and the second I switch, it seems like everyone wants to play the character I switch to. So let's talk about how that can really mess up a run and things about that. So firstly, we'll take a look at Wylder. Wylder is one of the better characters in the game when it comes to stacking multiple copies of it. If you see 2 Wylders in your game, it doesn't necessarily mean failure at all. In fact, I don't think you should have any feelings one way or the other if you see double Wylders in your game. It doesn't mean it's going to be bad, it doesn't mean it's going to be good, but generally speaking, it's not going to have much impact on your run immediately. And that's typically because Wylders are relatively easy to gear. They typically have a wide range of weapons that they can use, and it's likely that a Wylder is going to get its own weapon that it needs. Like, you don't need to go somewhere to get weapons for Wylders. They'll just get their weapons as you go through the game. So they're not really going to be competing with each other for gear, so that shouldn't be an issue. There's also a really nice synergy with the flaming follow-up attack or the fire weapon buff that you get from the relic for Wylder and Recluses, allowing them to pull fire off of a boss or an enemy that you're attacking so that they can vary their magical cocktail a little bit just from magic. So if you're playing with Wylder and Recluse, that's a really good combo in my opinion. Where things get a little bit trickier though is if you're playing with like a Duchess or an Executor, where those 2 classes are trying to apply Frostbite and you're continuously removing it with your fire damage, because when you hit with fire damage on a target that has Frostbite, it will remove the Frostbite. Now, the advantage of leaving Frostbite on a target is that you'll do more damage, everyone will do more damage to that target, so that can be very, very beneficial. The disadvantage to that is that you can't reapply Frostbite when it's already on. So if Wylder pulls it off, then Duchess or Executor could reapply it, ripping a more chunk of health off and re-triggering Frostbite. So that can work really, really well too, depending on what you're trying to do, as long as everyone understands that. But what I generally find is that more often than not, when Wylder has that weapon buff, he's pulling off Frostbite when it would be better to remain on the target. If you're playing in a group with people and you're going for the apply Frostbite, rip it off, apply Frostbite, rip it off strategy, and you're communicating that, that's one thing. But if you're playing with a group of randoms, I find it to be a bit of a downer every time I get Frostbite on a target and it just gets pulled off with one Wylder swing. So keep in mind that that can be a bit of an issue. Also note that every subsequent time you reapply Frostbite, it's going to take more and more hits as the resistance goes higher and higher each time you apply it. So at some point, it's going to be very, very difficult to apply Frostbite again. Next, we'll take a look at Ironeye. Ironeye is probably one of the 2 best characters in the game at stacking with copies of himself. This is because Ironeyes can build around their starting weapon very effectively. They can put, fire, lightning, holy, poison, bleed, frost, whatever they want on their bow. A lot of Ironeyes do this. And then they just go and get stones and upgrade their bow for whatever boss they're fighting, and they automatically have the weakness of that, because it's quite difficult as an Ironeye to guarantee yourself a weapon that has or a bow that has the damage type that you need for a boss's weakness. Even if you go to like a fire camp or a lightning camp, it's very rare to get a bow that has the exact element that you need, so it's a lot easier sometimes to just build it in advance. So you can have multiple Ironeyes in a group, and they usually just do the same thing. They just build their own weapon. Also, a lot of times you'll get at least 1 purple bow in a run, so even if you have a specialized bow that does poison or frost, and then you switch to the other bow that does more damage for regular attacks afterward, that's very, very easy to do, and you don't need to go seek out bows when playing Ironeye, so they stack very, very well together. Additionally, you might think, well, they both have a marking character skill that competes with each other, but it actually works out really well in my estimation. Because they can keep reapplying the mark and extending the duration between the two of them, it means that you're getting more reliable marks. So having 2 Ironeyes in a group actually makes marking easier. It doesn't make it redundant, so that also contributes to having more Ironeyes being good. Next, we'll take a look at Recluse, and Recluses need good staves, and they need good spells on those staves in order to really crank out their damage. When Recluses have, like, Stars of Ruin, they are basically top-tier DPS in the game, so if they can get that, they're going to slaughter, and a couple other spells are really strong as well. But if you have another Recluse in the group that's going to be competing for that spell, it's going to be hard to find 2 Stars of Ruin, or maybe a Duchess that also is casting spells. It will be a competition between them to get that good spell. Now, obviously, if you're playing in a group with another Recluse, or you're playing in a group with another Duchess, you can communicate and figure out who's doing what, but when you're playing with randoms, that random's just going to grab the spell and you're going to be stuck with nothing. So that can be very, very challenging if you're playing Recluse. Now, Duchesses don't always use staves. A lot of them just go for status effect builds and ignore staffs altogether. Some Duchesses will pick up a staff if they see it, but they're not necessarily gunning for it. Like if someone drops them one, they'll take it. But it's really hard to know what you're going to get with randoms. Duchesses is a little bit of a wild card compared to Recluse, because like Recluse, you know they're going to need to go and get some spells. And Recluses work really, really well with groups, party members that deal any sort of like lightning, fire, or holy damage, making their magic cocktail more effective as they can pull other elements off of the target. And these are typically Ironeyes, or a Wylder that has reliably fire, or maybe a Raider. These characters will usually have some sort of elemental status or damage type that can really benefit a Recluse, so they work really well compared to like a Duchess or Executor that's typically going for status effect build-up. Keep in mind, though, that if you can get Frostbite on target and reduce its resistances, this will increase your damage as a Recluse, so you're not necessarily worse using a Recluse with them, but your magic cocktail won't be able to pull off other elements. Next, we'll take a look at Guardian, and Guardian works well in just about any group. But the biggest issue with Guardian is that he has the lowest damage of any character on average, which means that your overall damage is going to be less than a group that doesn't have a Guardian. And when you're running through the days, like when you have a Guardian that can just hold a boss in place, like, I don't know, Bell-Bearing Hunter, and just tank it straight up while everyone DPSs into it, it can make things go really, really quickly. But depending on the end-of-day boss, Guardians can be very effective or not effective at all. So it really depends on the boss that you're facing. And I think it's one of the reasons that Guardians may need a buff in some way, because right now they're really good at very specific boss fights and they're really terrible at other ones. And their damage is just so far behind every other character that, you know, when I see a Guardian, unless they're played really well, I ultimately think this run might not go very well. Additionally, you absolutely should not stack 2 Guardians in a group. Not only will your damage be low, but you really want one Guardian to tank when you have a Guardian. That can make a run go really smoothly up until the last boss. But if you have 2 Guardians tanking, well, who's going to be dealing the damage? And that can really slow things down. Now, talking a little bit about Executors. Executors are great at applying status effects. They can do triple status effects in the form of Bleed, Poison, and Frostbite. And Duchesses typically have Poison and Frostbite. So there's a bit of a double-edged sword with this, which I'll touch upon here. When you have an Executor and a Duchess, or 2 Executors, once you apply that Frostbite and that Poison, typically you're only going to apply it once on any given boss, or maybe a tough-to-kill enemy or something like a Crucible Knight or something like that. Unless you're talking of end-of-day bosses, then you might apply them multiple times. But outside of that, you're not going to trigger these twice usually. Bleeding you will, though. So if you have Executors both swinging into the target, triggering Hemorrhage repeatedly, that can be really good. So that's a little bit better than an Executor and Duchess. However, the end-of-day bosses and the Night Lord, those fights typically go on longer most of the time. And that means you're going to need to reapply Frostbite and Poison in those fights. And they get harder and harder to reapply. So having multiple characters stacking those status effects can make them trigger more reliably. So I would argue that having a double Executors or an Executor and a Duchess is actually a boon most of the time, unless the boss is immune to Poison and Frostbite. Then in that case, obviously, it won't be. But it's actually a boon in that case because you will be able to reapply those status effects more reliably in those things. And typically, people wipe on an end-of-day boss or a Night Lord, mostly Night Lords, and not the rest of the bosses anyway, so that's what you should be prioritizing. So I think Executor, Duchess, or double Executors is actually a really strong pairing most of the time, you know, depending on the boss's resistances. And again, they don't really compete for each other for gear because they can just upgrade their starter weapon to have triple status effects. So gearing them is not a problem at all, so having multiple Executors in a group isn't an issue. Okay, so moving on to Revenant, and Revenants is a tricky one to fit in some groups. I mean, they're a very, very strong class in any group, but when you have 2 Revenants in a group, it can be a disaster, and that's because it's difficult enough to get great seals on a Revenant as it is. Sometimes no churches spawn or great churches spawn. Sometimes you just get unlucky with seals and you get nothing. And if you have 2 Revenants in a group, they're going to be fighting over all those spells. So that can make it very difficult to outfit 2 Revenants with good seals. Additionally, if you have a Recluse in your group, and I'm talking about a random here, not necessarily someone who's a friend of yours that you can like communicate with and decide how you're going to play your Recluse, but a Recluse has S scaling in Faith as well, so they may pick up your incantations, and you may have to battle with them to get good spells. So if you see a Recluse and you're playing Revenant, or if you see another Revenant when you're playing Revenant with randoms, it's not necessarily a sign things are going to go badly, but it could be a lot more difficult for you. And on top of that, you know, Ironeye's out there, Executors out there, Duchesses out there will tend to look for weapon buffs on seals like Black Flame Blade, or Blood Flame Blade, or Poison Armament, or Lightning Armament. And if they see those on a seal, they're going to grab them, which they should. But maybe there was a really other powerful spell on that seal that now you can't get because they need to use it. That can make it a little bit harder to gear with them as well, depending on who you're playing with. And again, if you're playing with randoms, you just don't know what they're going to do. I find when I'm playing Revenant, I'm fighting with just about everyone when seals drop on the ground. Like, even raiders will run in and try and grab something and see if they can use it like a weapon buff or something like that. So it can make getting a seal very, very difficult. Moving on to Duchess. Duchesses are excellent at status effects, poison and frostbite specifically. They're good at spell casting. Other Executors and Duchesses could be redundant during the first couple of days, or at least not for the end of day bosses and the final boss, but I think are more beneficial than not for the final boss. So if you see another Executor in your group or another Duchess in your group, that doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a problem. The only real issue I could see is that if you both plan to spell cast and you're fighting over staves, that might be an issue, but you just don't know that when you're playing with the Duchess because not all of them spell cast. Additionally, you may find yourself fighting with Recluses for staves if you have a Recluse in your group, because obviously they're going to be looking for Stars of Ruin or some other good spell like Ancient Deathranker, and you know, you might want to use that if you find it, and it's like, do you keep it for yourself or do you give it to the Recluse, or does the Recluse just snatch up everything it sees and you have no opportunity to get anything? So if you see a random Recluse, you never know how that's going to go for you as a Duchess if you spellcast. And lastly, that brings us to Raider. Raiders typically use giant weapons like colossal weapons and fossil swords, which almost no one else uses except Revenant. Maybe sometimes a Wylder will use one, but usually they're not fighting with anyone else for the weapons that they get. People will drop them for them. They may find themselves fighting with other Raiders depending on how that Raider is playing. Some Raiders like to dual wield, some like to two-hand a weapon, and you might have a little bit more trouble gearing a Raider if you have another Raider in your party. I still think it would probably be fine, but that's probably the one exception. Otherwise, they get along just about fine with every other character in the game, making them and Ironeye probably the 2 easiest characters to mix into any group. And I think this is probably why we had them at S ranking in our character rankings. They just fit so easily and they're so easy to use. But that's a whole nother thing. So ultimately, again, you can use any character and any combination of characters in order to clear the game, depending on, you know, how things go and obviously what your skill level is. But there are things that can make things harder for you, particularly if you play the game with randoms, and try to illustrate what those are in this game. I think a lot of people have figured some of this out, because I see a lot of people like quitting immediately, like if 2 Recluses are playing or 2 Revenants are playing, or I don't know. Anytime you see a double stack, depending on what they are, a lot of people will quit almost immediately. And it's made me wonder, like, should they prevent double stacking? I don't think they should, but sometimes it's like, if that person wants to play Revenant, you want to play Revenant, or that person wants to play Recluse and you want to play Recluse, neither of you is going to move. Do you just quit out at the beginning and save yourself the time, or do you just try and tough it out? What's the solution to that? I don't know. What do you guys think? Did I miss anything? Let me know in the comments below.